I think I've run into a file size limit there. I was just saying that all these blades are in place. I've just lifted the first blade back over the fifth blade. Everything is correct. Now this is the control ring which closes the blades down, and that sits on here. And that should sit over the top of each of those little pivot rivets on those blades. And then the case goes over, and this only goes on in one position. I've got to make sure I get this correct. There it is, that's the one I'm looking for. Wiggle that slightly, that drops into place. Lift off the outer part of my jig. That all looks good. And we've got 3 tiny screws that hold this in place. So I'll start those screws, but I won't tighten them right up until I've checked that the diaphragm blades are indeed all sitting with their pivots in the appropriate slots or holes. Now that screw lifted out, it didn't start, which means that that plate wasn't sitting down flush, which probably means that a blade is misplaced somewhere. Let's have another go. That screw doesn't want to start. Interesting. Let's pop it over here. Alright, 2 of those screws are correct. One didn't want to go. Oh, it just pinged off my tweezers. Find that in a second. I'll just nip these 2 screws up. It's probably sufficient to stop the plate from coming off, losing the position of the blades. I'll check. There's something here. Oh yes, that's... Yeah, one of the blades, its slot, its pin, its rivet was out of position, so it's preventing that plate from going down. Now I have to recover that missing screw. Back in a second. Yeah, fortunately I found it. So I can get that screw in place, hopefully. The camera's now grizzling that the battery's tired. That seems to be pretty much the story with batteries, they're always tired. Right, I'll slacken these 2 screws off slightly. Get this screw started. That's better. When you have multiple screws holding down a plate, it's usually useful to have your screws slightly loose until all the screws are placed in position. Now I'm checking the action of this diaphragm, and it's certainly much smoother than it was. I will probably put a touch of graphite powder in there to lubricate that slightly. You'd probably get away with it as it is, but better safe than sorry. Alright, well I got the diaphragm all cleaned, reassembled, lubricated. I'm very happy with that. You can probably hear it almost makes no sound at all as you swing that backwards and forwards. It's extremely clean, nothing sticky or rubbing. And I can turn my attention here now to the mechanism plate and the lens tube. And I'll clean these components up. In much the same way, I'm removing any old oil contamination along with it, any old grease, dust, dirt. Also gives me a chance to look closely at the surfaces, which might allow me to spot some problem with the part, or corrosion or something of that nature, something that I might not notice with a casual glance. Here I'm cleaning the blade actuating ring. This is the component that swings the blades open and closed as it swings from left to right. And the shutter. There are various ways these components were lubricated originally. Typically a little bit of graphite grease would have been put on to lubricate the surfaces, sometimes dry graphite, sometimes other lubricants. They will work dry to a certain extent. Nothing mechanical really likes running without any form of lubrication at all. This plate is where the shutter differs from synchro contour shutters in the rangefinder cameras. This plate is an extra component which can swing backwards and forwards. Effectively, it moves the fixed pivot point for the blades, so it's an alternative way for opening the blades up, and it's used for opening the shutter up for viewing purposes, because you need to be able to see through the lens with a single lens reflex camera. You can probably see there's a lot of staining on that plate. Again, they're fingerprint type patterns. They'll be the result of that plate being handled by someone with their bare fingers, and it can happen at any stage in the factory. The shutters, of course, are a product of Deckel. They're from the Deckel factory. Companies like Kodak and Voigtlander, Zeiss, all the camera manufacturers tended to buy the shutters from a shutter manufacturer. They didn't make the shutters themselves. The two big common names at this period were when the vast bulk of good 35mm cameras came from Germany typically, and the two manufacturers that stood out were Deckel, who made the synchro contour type shutters, contour rapids, and Gauthier. Gauthier made the Prontos, Prontors, Veros and other shutters, both of which have their followers who will swear that their chosen shutter is the best. Proof of the pudding's being in the eating, of course. whichever shutter produces good results is a good shutter. I would say that the contour type shutters were typically of a finer engineering standard. They probably cost more to make and assemble. Whether that translates to actual better performance in the field is debatable. So I'm dropping the blade actuating ring onto the mechanism plate. I'll swing that detent spring into position. And the detent spring main job is to see that the blades don't flop about. They're kept fairly snugly in one position. Just make sure I swing this little pallet out of the way. With trapping the blade, trapping the actuating ring, stopping it from falling into position. Now I'm only fitting 2 of the retaining screws at this stage, because the third one also holds the bracket for the main drive spring, and once that's fitted you can't easily fit the main drive cam into position, so it's just as easy to fit that component later. So I'm just checking the action of this, taking note of any stiffness. It runs smoothly. No obvious binds there. You can certainly feel the impact of this detent spring here. It keeps the blades firmly closed unless they're shifted. Once they're shifted, because of the angle of the spring, it's only a minimal drag at that point. That works very well. So that mechanism plate's quite clean. As I did with the diaphragm, I will use some graphite powder, and typically what I do is I just drop some graphite powder in at these 5 points, move the actuating ring backwards and forwards multiple times to distribute that powder so that it works into any working surfaces, and then blow it all out, make sure it's gone. Those components are good. I look at my shutter blades. We have 5 blades. One of them has got a cutout on it. The other blades are all identical. And these blades need to be cleaned. And the first thing I'll do is I will attempt to clean one with some naphtha and look to see what the results are like. If there's still obvious staining on the blade or any hint of surface roughness, then the blades will have to be polished. But that looks very good. I certainly wouldn't hesitate to use the blade in that condition. You can certainly see contaminants coming off on the cotton bud here, but the blades are clean, well they are cleaning, and they are in good condition. On a Retina Reflex of this type, of course, the lens is not interchangeable. That means that the shutter blades are protected from the atmosphere by having a rear lens component fitted at the back of the shutter, and typically the front lens component fitted at almost all times at the front of the shutter means they are not prone to the same level of surface contamination that, say, the shutter blades on a Retina Reflex S would be, for example. With a Retina Reflex S, there is no lens component behind the blades, so the shutter is open to the atmosphere at the inside of the camera, and there is also probably the lenses were changed more often because the fully interchangeable style lenses were more convenient and certainly were probably more frequently used. Alright, well, I'll just lubricate that plate with a bit of graphite, and then I'll come back in and we'll assemble those blades in place. Alright, here's our mechanism plate. I have the blades all cleaned and ready to go. And we have this plate. And this plate goes on in one position. And I've got to see if I can remember where that position is. Is it there? Yep. That's it. So that's the position of that plate. Here our blades. That should be closed. This is positioned for the blades to be open. And one of these blades has a cutout in it. And I think it's our blade number 5. Okay, let's just check that. Okay, I think that it was blade number 4 I wanted for that one. That looks happier. Right, so I've got those blades laying down in place. Now I have my shutter case, and I should be able to lower that into position. Check that all the holes are lined up. And fit the 3 retaining screws. Let's get the screws started. Once they're all started, I'll run them down slightly and check the action of the shutter. make sure that the blades do indeed swing backwards and forwards, and they do, and they do open and close under the action of the plate that allows you to view the image through the finder. So I can tighten those 3 screws up. And just check that action again. That's very good, that's very prompt, very smooth, no problems at all. So we have our componentry from the rear of the shutter here. I'll clean those, pop those aside, and then put the springs back on the inside of the shutter. Then we can place these in place. So as before, I'm just using Naphtha. I'm removing any contaminants here, and in this case it's grease and dirt. I want these components clean. I may well put a smear of molybdenum around the inside edge there to make sure that there's no high friction spots there, but it'll be very slight. And I'll do that as required. This ring controls the flash sync selection or the self-timer selection. Pop those to one side. That piece of paper has had its day. There's our shutter. Now I'm just got to watch this flash contact here, so I've got that sitting over the edge of my block of wood so it doesn't get bent over more times than is useful. You have to fit these springs in place. They're very good at getting away, and I have to hold a toothpick over that post so that there's no way for that spring to escape into space, as it's busily trying to do at the moment. The springs are quite fine. They're hard to manipulate. With your tweezers sometimes. Oh, it's almost in position. That tab is just not quite sitting where it should. That's it. Is it seated? Yeah. Sometimes it's hard to tell if the springs are seated correctly. That's good. The next spring is the one for the B lever. It's another very fine spring and enthusiastic to get away. Now that's either magnetised or my tweezers are magnetised. However, it's in place and it can't easily get away. So the B lever I need to fit in place at this point. So I'll just give that a wipe to make sure it's clean. There's not usually any trouble with that component. Its spring is quite robust, which means that normally it will swing in unless there is a very good reason why it shouldn't. See if I can get this shutter open so that the B lever can drop down into its position. There we have it. Now this spring, and I'll find another screwdriver for dealing with that because that was awkward to get out, and it doesn't need to be that awkward. Sorry for the shaking. The toolbox is round the back here holding supporting the camera at the moment. That's right, so this screwdriver. So I will hold that with my tweezers, push the screwdriver into place. Sort of wedges on this one, which is sometimes more convenient. Get that screw started. Went very smoothly. It's always suspicious. I'll swing that spring into its position. Get my screwdriver again and tighten that screw up. That's it. So that's in position, and the B lever swings freely, allows the shutter blades or allows the blade actuating ring to let the blades back to the closed position. Alright, so far so good. A little touch of molybdenum here on that detent spring. Here on that toothed surface where it couples to the flash sink, and drop this ring into place, making sure it falls behind that return spring, and it did. That's neat. And the diaphragm actuating ring, which couples with the pin on the back of the diaphragm there. I've got that upside down. Yes, I do. That's useful. I'm just checking the action here to see if it's smooth. No obvious binding. It feels quite good. I'm just going to... That's my phone. Back in a second. Now I'm back. Cell phones are wonderful things, but they're no good when you leave them lying around in another room somewhere and you have to go on a mad chase around the house to see if you can figure out where the ringing noises are coming from. Okay, so we get this plate in position. We have 3 screws, 2 little flat screws and 1 post that holds the spring, and of course I didn't take good notice of which one held the spring, so we'll just pop these where I think they might be and then check where the spring sits and see if it looks correct. So the spring has to pull the blades down into the closed position, so it is pulling around here. Yes, that's correct. So my post for the spring to hook on must go there. And my screw must go there and there. And the spring must go here. Like that. So as soon as it's released, the diaphragm closes down snappily. That's good. I'll check that I've got those 3 screws down snug. That's very good. This spring here operates the blades. It operates that plate that pulls the blades down into the closed position. That's that one there, isn't it? Yep. It looks good. Now this can go into the outer case, but the outer case needs to be cleaned first because it was quite dirty. Oh, there's a lot of sand here actually. I thought that was more dust looking at it earlier, but that is very much sand. So I'll see if I can get this component cleaned. That's quite greasy. There's some discoloration in the case here. I'm not sure what it is. It certainly has a rough feel to it. I don't know whether it was some sort of sealer or lacquer that was put there. In each case it seems to be associated with the screws in the case at that point. Alright, that's not bad. I'm going to blow that out. There's certainly some muck on there. I think I'll try a little bit of acetone, see if that'll lift that contaminant. No, it's not making much of a dent on it. Certainly pulled off some of the rubbish. I think that'll do. So, getting this in place. There's a slot visible in the case at this point. Now that slot, we have to get this through. At the same time, we have to get the green tab through the hole in the case here. So it's all fairly interesting. So I'll start getting the green tab through the case. And see if I can get my flash contact and its insulating plastic through the slot in the case all at the same time. That seemed to go fairly well. Now a retainer ring. Which was a bit of a fight to get off. Not exactly running on smoothly, but that's because the edge of the aluminium case there is slightly roughened up, I think. Yeah, that's certainly going on. I'm just running this on with my fingers at the moment. I'm not using a tool. So it's not so tight it can't be done up with fingers. I'm checking the seating of everything here. It all seems to work nicely. Right, I'll do up my retaining ring. And I'm sure that's where it started from because my mutilation marks match up. That's good. So we've got the back of our shutter complete. And I'm tossing up now whether to assemble that to the camera body at this stage or not. Decisions.